All right, I'm delighted to say that we are joined in studio this morning by James Stephens centre-back Eoin Larkin. How are things?
I'm good. James Stephens centre-back sounds a bit awkward, but it's usually centre-forward, but I'm very good now this morning.
How are you finding that position, and how have you found it over the last couple of years, I think it is? Of course, obviously, you're in studio here on the back of a tough enough defeat to Ballyhale.
Yeah, look, I suppose it's different. It's certainly different up in the forwards, but over the last number of months, I think I've got the hang of it. And yeah, like you say, Sunday was a tough day at the office, but I suppose I've learned to put those defeats in perspective at the moment. And it's a tough day at the office, and we'll just have to regroup and go again.
So it does get easier as time goes by to take them. I presume losing to Ballyhale is never an easy thing.
Yeah, no, look, you still be devastated, you still be very disappointed in that, but look, there's bigger things in life, and you just have to move on very quickly. And luckily in sport, we get the chance to sample it again and go again and see where that takes us.
You do have a brand new book out. It's called Camouflage. It's absolutely brilliant, I must say, Eoin. Camouflage is an interesting title. Why did you go for that?
I actually wanted to do black and amber camouflage, and the publishers came back to me with just camouflage. And when they did, to be honest I said, yeah, that's it. You know, that should be the name of it. And you know, I was delighted with that. It shows, I suppose, the army background and, you know, obviously the background in the Depression and all that kind of stuff that nobody's seen. You know, everybody's seen Eoin Larkin the hurler, and nobody had to see or endure the other stuff. So I thought it was very fitting, the name. So I was delighted when they came back with that.
I want to start on the subject of sports psychology, Eoin, because it's a very interesting one. Like, just first off the bat here, when you hear the phrase sports psychology, would you say it was a huge part of your intercounty career or just a small part?
I would say it is it was a small part, but it was a small part in the sense that we never had sports psychologists as such down with us. To the other side of that is, I think Brian Cody is probably a sports psychologist in his own right. You know, always seemed to say the right thing, always knew how to motivate players and all that kind of stuff. So, very kind of contrasting whether you like to put it in as, you know, was it a huge part or a small part? But definitely it was a huge part. But as regards, like I say, the sports psychologists were never really around. Yeah,
and that's the point I want to get on to eventually, that Cody is probably the greatest psychologist of them all, because it doesn't actually come across as blatant psychology. But there's a great juxtaposition in the book where you talk about meeting Padraig Harrington and you talk about meeting Jerry McEntee, two very different experiences, Eoin.
Yeah, hugely different experiences, I suppose. Padraig Harrington was not long after winning the British Open, I think, and you know, I was on a potential NCO's course down in Cork and had to come up to Kilkenny we were going on this mystery tour, and we arrived at Padraig Harrington's home course, and Padraig Harrington, sure enough, came in and kind of gave us a little bit of a speech, but it didn't kind of register with most of us that he started talking about the left side of the brain, and this is the part where, you know, you function, and this is the part that does this, and we all kind of walked out and we didn't know what was going on, you know. And then you have the other side of it then, that you meet Jerry McEntee, and he's just so driven, and he talks about getting off the bus after or before one of the All-Ireland semi-finals and hitting a lad a box, you know, and he's going to that extreme, and you're looking at the two different contrasting figures. Obviously, you know, you'd have to have great respect for Jerry McEntee when, you know, he does something like that, I suppose, before an All-Ireland semi-final.
I dare say his method of psychology went down a little bit better, or it was more relatable to the team of Kilkenny hurlers at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is, he only lasted about 10 minutes on the field that day. He was so wound up after getting off the bus. He clocked the lad in the match as well, and got sent off. So he obviously told us, don't do that one anyway, you know. But no, look, there was very few people that came in to talk to us at the time. Jerry was obviously one of them, and after the first time we met him, you know, we were wondering, you know, what was different that he was going to say and kind of motivate us again. And every time you walked out, it was like a speech from Brian Cody. You always walked out and you said, he's after doing it again, you know. And that was the way you walked out with Jerry McEntee as well. It was the same It was the same kind of a speech, it was the same motivational talk and all, but just had a different spin to it. And, you know, felt like you could really play the All-Ireland final that day when you walked out from hearing him speak.
You talk about the epic games you had with Tipperary down through the years, and you said that they had triggers like pointing to their head after getting scores and things like that. From your depiction of them, it strikes me that they're somebody who would read more into what Padraig Harrington would have to say. They perhaps read into the different sides of their brain and perhaps went to an overly scientific level with this sort of stuff.
Yeah, but I think that was more so. It was more so that they weren't going to fall apart, that they were so mentally tough that they were going to keep going. And I think that kind of stemmed from 2009, obviously the thought they had the All-Ireland one and we came back and pipped them. And I think in 2010 that was then they started, you know, this stuff of pointing to their head. And, you know, maybe they did tap into the Padraig Harrington kind of stuff and maybe they did all that, but I just felt that was, you know, we're not going to lose focus today. We thought we had you bet a year ago. We're not going to lose focus today. We're going to keep concentrating till the very end, till the game is over.
What are you thinking when you see that?
Well, when I had to look at it all over the winter after 2010, it's just driving me up the wall. And actually, to be honest about it, it kind of motivated us a bit for 2011 then as well, because we didn't want to see that for another year. But look, they thoroughly deserved their victory in 2010. You know, I know we had a couple of injuries and that, but they were outstanding in the final, and you know, you just had to take your hat off to them.
It's interesting that you used the word motivation there, because when you're reading the book, you're trying to get a sense of what is the thing that motivates you the most. There's a harsh line from your wife, Anne, in there saying that you've got a selfish streak to you, and then that you have a line in there as well saying you went out to win Hurler of the Year and then you did go out and win Hurler of the Year. Yeah. Like, I think people sometimes are a little bit ashamed of actually saying, no, I wanted the success for myself and that helped the team as a whole. I personally don't see anything wrong with that. You know, the classic post-match interview is always, well, at least the team won and so on and so forth. Like, that is something that clearly you tapped into, that if you got the best out of yourself, that was the best thing for the team as well.
Yeah, it was. And look, don't get me wrong, the team winning is everything, but you still want to reach your potential and I suppose do the thing that you set out to do, kind of, and that was just one of them. You know, ever since I was a young lad, all I wanted to do was hurl. All I wanted to do was play for the club, play for Kilkenny, and be the best. And you know, I knew I was in the shape I could be the best when I came back from Kosovo at that stage. And Martin Fogarty just asked me the question, and to be honest about it, when I was in Kosovo and I was doing all the training, you know, I kept telling myself this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And that was one of the things I told myself, I'm going to win Hurler of the Year. And then when Martin Fogarty asked me, you know, what's your aim for the year? You know, the stereotypical answer was, you know, I want to get on the team and I want to get on the panel first. And he said, no, what's your ambition for the year? And my ambition, well, I said, I'd love to get Hurler of the Year. And do you think you can do it? I said, yeah, I can. And then, obviously, I went off and got it. And he, in fairness to him, he called up with me the night of the All-Stars. He said, fair play to you. He said, you said you were going to do it. He said, you went out and got it. Yeah,
and that kind of brings us full circle on the whole psychology point of view. Yeah. That is exactly how you managed to tap into your mind. That's how he managed to tap into your mind as well.
Yeah, and that, you know, that was a recurrent thing. I suppose we used to have one-on-one meetings with Brian and Martin and Mick, and that would be a recurrent thing, you know, what do you want out of this year? And,
right.
And that was the whole, you know, that was the sports psychology that we're talking about. You know, it didn't pay someone to come down that had degrees in sports psychology and all that kind of stuff, but like the three lads were masters at.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So do you think you developed that level inside in your brain as a result of working with Brian Cody, or do you feel that you had to have some of that already in you to actually be a success under Brian Cody, this ability to have a singular focus and use that to help achieve greater things?
Yeah, I think you have to have it slightly, and I think Brian Cody then moulds the rest of it and drives the rest of it out through you. Like I would have often seen, you know, down the club scene, you'd often say, you know, this lad or that lad has to be brought in, and often it's someone very different. You know, right. This lad could be shooting the lights out, but this lad is working hard for the team, and it's often the worker that's brought in, kind of, and Brian just moulds them and keeps, you know, tapping into him and, you know, kind of develops them over time. And it's like in Kilkenny, you know, a lot of lads would have opinions of who should be in with Kilkenny and who shouldn't, but their opinions are totally different to Brian's opinions, and it's often, you know, the lads say would little or no success as an underage, or maybe had success and, you know, has been out there for a couple of years, and Brian brings him in. He just sees something in him that he can tap into and mould him into a Kilkenny player. And
that grafting nature is so important. Sometimes it can be seen as old school. Like, there's a great the description in your book of you going into training and you had cold showers. We didn't want to say it to Brian because perhaps that would come across as not having the grafting ability that you need. And there's a nice line then at the end of it saying, meanwhile, if that happened in Cork, I wonder what sort of fuss they'd be kicking up. When all that stuff is going on with the strikes in Cork, when you see some of the things that they're talking about, trying to become uber professional, what are you thinking at that time?
Well, I'm thinking, what is the point of it? You know, you either want to hurl for Cork or you don't. And, you know, as you say, we had cold showers in Kieran's, and this could have been November or December, so it was freezing out as well. But nobody had the guts to go up and tell Brian, listen, Brian, the showers are cold and we're going on strike because of it. You know, you'd be quickly told, there's the door and see you later. So, but look, I genuinely think all these strikes and all that they set Cork back a good few years, and, you know, all we wanted to do was hurl for Kilkenny, you know, represent Kilkenny and represent our clubs and all that kind of stuff, and it just seemed to be so different down there. Now, you know, people will argue that, you know, they hadn't everything what we had, but we had very little. You know, we had meals after training, but that was it, kind of. But in saying that, anything that we wanted, the Kilkenny County Board got for us. Now, as I said, it wasn't that huge that we wanted, and Brian would usually tell them what we needed or what we wanted. It would never come from the players.
How do you think things would have turned out if Donald Cusack happened to be born in Kilkenny and he wanted to lead a strike against Brian Cody?
Yeah, he wouldn't have had a very long inter-county career, I'd imagine, because, you know, as we've seen over the years, Brian has dropped lads, you know, and cut lads from the panel and things like that. And he'd always say that, you know, the team in Kilkenny are bigger than one person, and he'd often say that, look, your job in here, he said, careers will come and go, but your job in here is to leave the jersey in a better place than you found it. And to be fair, he is stuck by that right through, and he believes in that system, and to be fair, who are we to argue with it, because it seems to be working.
Some of the Cork lads might actually agree with you that the strikes kind of did set them back years. They'll actually probably argue that if the strikes didn't happen, or maybe if their view of things was perfect down through those years, they might have gone toe-to-toe with Kilkenny a few more times. Do you go along with that at all, that they were on a par with you for a couple of those years?
Yeah, maybe they were in or around on a par with us, but I maybe they would have went toe-to-toe. You know, do I think they would have beaten us anymore? I don't think so, because I think just the team that we had at the time was unbelievable. And I genuinely don't think... I think we were so mentally driven as well, not just to do it for ourselves, but to do it for everyone else, because we were so united. We were friends, you know, and it's kind of weird that so many of us were friends on the same team, that we actually wanted to do it for each other. So I don't... Possibly would have been closer games, but I don't think they would have taken any of the All-Irelands.
And then just the last one on Cork, how many of those players would have got into the Kilkenny team? Say, let's say the 2008 Kilkenny team, your best All-Ireland ever, and let's say Cork, what is it, 04, 05, into that Kilkenny team?
It's hard to know, because who would you drop?
Yeah.
You know, looking back on it, I wouldn't have dropped anyone.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know. Would any of them, maybe one or two of them, might have got in, I don't know. It's hard to make the comparison, I suppose, but like I just know from the lads that I played with how much effort they put in to get themselves better, how much dedication they had, you know, mental drive, all that kind of stuff. I'd find it very hard to leave any of them out and bring someone from Cork in.
Absolutely. We've spoken about the cold showers there. One of the things that you had to play through is not just cold water, it's actually through a hell of a lot of physical pain. It struck me at times during the book. There's a lot of injections, there's a lot of painkillers. How big a part was that through? Because you had a hip operation at the age of 25, I think. Yeah. Like, was it after that operation then things changed for you, that managing pain became a huge part of becoming an intercounty footballer?
Yeah, well, it was actually before that. You know, I thought that getting this hip operation would get rid of the pain, but like I had been struggling for a while before that, and it just became part of my normal routine. Then after that, I had to get regular physio, I had to get regular kind of dry needles, you know, all that kind of stuff, and that just became, you know, I had to do this to to be right to play. And, you know, it was constant pain, it was constant days after matches, couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't do anything, you know. And But that was just the level I wanted to go. I had to go to if I wanted to be right to play on the biggest stage. And, you know, for 12 years, I done it. And eventually then this year, I find a cure. It's ironic, like.
So what happened this year?
Yeah, so I spoke about in the book, I went up to Sean Boylan's in 2015 after I broke my thumb before the All-Ireland, and I was up with a girl called Niamh Guy. She works with Sean up there, and like she got me back, my thumb not right, but nearly back right to play in the All-Ireland. And I was in contact with her earlier on this year, and she said, just pop up, like, you know. And I went up, and after 10 or 15 years of being tortured with pain and trying to just manage things, after an hour with her, I'm cured.
And what did she do?
She just manipulated my whole joints and all that kind of stuff, put my pelvis back into line, and that was that. And I said to her, how, after 10 years of going to physios, can you do that in an hour? And she said, it's just not practice. She said, all physios are doing now is just treating where the pain area is.
And this is a more holistic approach?
Yeah. So I've been going to her for once a week for the last couple of months, and I have no pain.
That's incredible. You could have done with, because I know Kieran Donaghy said that he used to pop into Sean Boylan before, on the day of All-Ireland finals, or one in particular, so he would have been around then to sort you out 10 years ago, but I suppose it's a bit too late now. Like, on that issue, it's very interesting thinking about how Cody thinks about that, because he's obviously very careful, as we'll get to in a moment, in terms of the welfare of his players, and he does care a lot. But as well as that, there is a culture of hardness in the team that was actually required for Kilkenny to reach the levels that they did. And I guess you're probably thinking to yourself, God, if I've got a niggle here, I better not complain about it too much, because I want to start on a Brian Cody team. Yeah,
and that was the thing. And often, you know, I suppose after maybe after a loss or something like that, Brian would arrive in and we'd have a meeting, and he'd call us in off the field and we'd have a meeting maybe before training, and he'd often say, you know, if you have a little pain or an ache, just get over it and get out in the field and train and all this kind of stuff. And that's going through your head then, because I was getting regular physio at the time. And you'd be thinking, I'm not going near that physio table now for a while. So, but then, you know, he'd go to the lads that required, say, the likes of Mick Fennelly and myself, that required regular physio to be able to get where we got to. And he'd say, look, you know, that wasn't aimed at you two or you or the other lad. You know, go in and get your stuff done, like. But he just didn't want people getting soft in the sense of, you know, I'll just jump up here and get a rub out and all this kind of stuff. You know, he wanted to get them out into the field and get their mental toughness like that. So, it was nice, because I wouldn't have went near the physio bed having had that meeting. I would have went straight out.
But was there lads that Cody tended to give a bit more of a break to? Like, was there a teacher's pet when it came to Brian Cody?
I don't think there was actually a teacher's pet. He did love Tommy Welsh. He loved everything that was about him. You know, he loved the way he went about the game. He loved his attitude towards it. He loved it, you know, that it meant so much to him. And, you know, like, I obviously got on well with him because I'm from the same club. Jackie got on well with him. The lads will tell you I was his pet. That's not true. But no,
you have that impression.
I don't know. It's just a bit of crack we had, I suppose. But like, if I was his pet, Tommy Welsh was definitely his pet. So no, look, he had a bit of crack with a few lads, and you know, a few lads kind of stayed clear and just done what they had to do and that kind of stuff. But I don't think there was any teacher's pet or kind of anything like that.
You've obviously gone through some very tough times, Owen, as you reveal in this book. But Brian Cody plays a huge part in this. Brian Cody is a man who helps you out hugely here. Were you surprised by that, first of all, that he had this emotional intelligence or this side to him? Because he is the coach who says, play through that niggle that you have, but he's also the coach who can come to you and realise that mental health is a huge issue in young Irish males, and is something that needs to be taken very, very seriously.
Yeah, no, I wasn't one bit surprised with it, to be honest about it, because as soon as I looked at the phone and I seen his name on it, I knew what was coming. I've seen it so many times down through the years that, you know, he'll help you with this, that and the other. You know, if you go to him and you have a problem, or, you know, he's very approachable and you know, he'll talk to you and give you a bit of advice or whatever. Obviously, I was going through a bad patch, and he would have seen that the Friday night before that. He would have seen that wasn't the Eoin Larkin that he knew.
What did he see?
Well, I went to a club game. It was the week after the Leinster final against Galway in 2016. I hadn't gone well. I'd been taken off at half-time, and, you know, just went out that night, went out the Monday, and then just for the rest of the week I was just down, like, you know, I was just out of it, in bed, you know, pulling the covers up over my head, not talking to anyone, that kind of stuff. Didn't go training that week, had a match that Friday night, and I just got up and went to the match. I was there in body, but not in mind. I just went in, got changed, sat there, you know, just didn't want to be there. And he would have seen that in my body language on the Friday night, and went home after the match, into bed again, you know, got up on Saturday morning and the phone rang. And I looked at the phone for about 20 or 30 seconds and it was Brian Cody's name on it, wondering would I answer it or not. So I eventually answered it, and simple question, he asked me, how are you feeling this morning? And I just burst out into tears. And, you know, it's not a conversation when he's asking you questions and you're crying your eyes out on the phone. But that just simple question then changed everything. He just turned around to me and said, look, there's obviously something wrong with you. If you want to tell me about it, you can go ahead, or I can meet you or whatever. If you want, just go into Tig, he said, and if you want, just keep it between yourself and Tig. I don't have to know anything, but if you want me to know, I'm here as well. So that was the start of it then. I went into Tig and, you know, here I am today.
How long had you been feeling like that up until that point?
Well, sure, like, up to that point, probably years. Right. Probably, you know, you could be talking maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years. Probably never as bad as I was that day. But I had really bad days too where, you know, I thought about suicide, and, you know, suicide was constantly on my mind, and, you know, I couldn't make the connection here that I was, you know, okay, but still thinking about suicide. Anne had been on to me a good bit as well, my wife, that I was depressed, and I was just in denial. I just couldn't admit that I was depressed. You know, depression happens to other people, it doesn't happen to me. But then I had to realise that if you're crying on the phone to Brian Cody, there has to be something causing it. You know, you just don't burst out crying to anybody or to Brian Cody on the phone. So I went into Tig and rang Tig, and I couldn't even talk to Tig when I went in. She done all the talking in there. And he just asked me another question. But he asked me a question that I hadn't planned, and I just said no. And he said, you know, if you're going to plan anything, will you ring me? You know, and I said, yeah, I will. But he was talking to me as if I was after telling him I had a sore throat. Yeah. You know, it was so normal. It was like he was after hearing it for 100 times that day. And then he just prescribed me medication like he would for a sore throat, like he was going to prescribe antibiotics. When he says, have you anything planned, he meant your suicidal thoughts. Had you anything planned on that front? Because I think that's a kind of an important clarification, is that when you have suicidal thoughts, it's not necessarily thinking about the practical means of how it's going to happen. It's actually more thinking what the legacy of that will be, because you talk about the financial benefits it would have had you followed through on that, which is obviously a very, very dark place to be. Yeah, it was. And, you know, I'd often think about that. Like, I'd often get into the car, and I live about 10 minutes outside of Kilkenny City, and I'd often pull up at my door and wonder how I got there. You know, because I'm just daydreaming on the way out, thinking about suicide, thinking about money troubles, and if I was gone, you know, everything would be sorted, the mortgage would be paid and all that kind of stuff. And they're all the thoughts that go through your head, and still you don't think you're depressed, you know, or you don't think there's anything wrong with you. But, like, you know, you get those thoughts, and then you come to the realisation of, look, you know, if you'd done this, you'd hurt this and this and your family. But then you start thinking about it again, and you start thinking about more and more, and then, you know, it consumes your thoughts, you know. So, like, and as you said, Ty just asked that simple question, had you anything planned, you know, had I anything planned to take my own life? That was the question. And, you know, when somebody is asking you that question, it's actually a bit weird, because you really want to answer it, but you're feeling, you know, if I say yeah or no here, what's the next question going to be? But it was so, he made it so normal that I just felt, you know, as soon as he asked me that, everything just lifted off my shoulders, and, you know, I could nearly feel, even though I wasn't better, I was on the road to recovery. Yeah, that's the thing. It was almost like turning around on your descent, like, because if Brian doesn't make that conversation, doesn't make that phone call, and you have that conversation, like, does the answer to his question then become, yes, I did have something planned? Do you then reach that stage, I wonder? I'm not sure if you thought about that. Yeah, I have thought about it, and I spoke about it in the book. You know, I was probably, you know, who knows how long, if that conversation doesn't happen, who knows Will it ever happen? Who knows? It could have been the week after, it could have been the day after. You know, I suppose we'll never know that, thankfully. And, you know, I just move on with my life. But you see, the thing about it is, since I went to Thai, I have coping skills now that if I'm feeling bad, I'm wondering, why am I feeling bad? You know, is it that I didn't take my medication? Is it this, or is it money? Or, you know,
right.
I can make that connection now that there's something wrong here. I'm not feeling great. What's going on here? And I think that's very important as well. But you only get that far when you accept that you have a problem, and you know, and then you can talk about it.
So you mentioned the coping skills there, and it's kind of an internal monologue, it's an internal questioning, trying to rationalise why you're feeling. That is the single biggest help for you, is it?
Absolutely, yeah, because if I'm not feeling good now, I'm wondering, why am I not feeling good? But beforehand, I'd be just thinking, you know, everybody's going through this, everybody thinks about suicide, everybody has bad days, everybody doesn't want to get out of bed and has no motivation for that. But that's not the way it is, you know, life is not like that. For most people, and you know, life should be good. You know, obviously you will have your bad days, and you know, things will be bad at work, or you know, it doesn't go right in the sporting front. But you have to put everything into perspective, and once you accept that, I think that's when you can move on.
What I found very interesting, Eoin, was that you're not an alcoholic, you're not a heavy drinker, but yet you made a connection between mental health and alcohol, which is, I would imagine, for a lot of Irish people, a very important connection to make, that you don't necessarily have to be checked in to have a serious problem that can actually give you issues with your mental health. Could you explain that to us in terms of what you were noticing in terms of your drinking habits? And I don't even want to call it a drinking habit, because that would suggest you had a problem, because it was just shorts, wasn't it, that you had an issue with?
Yeah, so I go out on maybe our Sunday or Monday, or Sunday and Monday after a match, and you know, you drink your few pints and you get full of the pints then, and then you go on shorts, vodka or whatever. And I would often find if I went for a few pints, you know, into the local and had a few pints, I'd get up and, you know, it'd be grand. There wouldn't be any major thing with my thoughts or anything like that. But then if I went on a binge then and drank Sunday night and drank shorts, and went out Monday and drank shorts, then I just did not want to do anything for the rest of the week.
Did you ever get to the bottom of that, why that was, or was there a psychological reason for that?
No, there's no psychological reason. I think it just didn't suit me, you know, and I was feeling down at the time. You know, I wouldn't have been down all the time, but certainly, you know, alcohol is a depressant, so shorts are just that thing that just triggered it for me. And, you know, I wouldn't want to move for the week, I wouldn't want to go training, I wouldn't want to go to work, I wouldn't want to get out of bed. All I want to do is stay in bed and pull the covers up, and I'd often be lying in the bed, and you know, people often talk about the fear after a drink, and I would actually get that, but it would be actually panic attacks that I'd be getting, and I'd be actually telling myself, you know, you're grand here, like you didn't do anything wrong, you're grand, and you know, you'd be grand for maybe 5 minutes, and then they'd come again, you know, so it's a wave of that then coming afterwards. But like, I could go out and drink pints all day and get up the following morning and I'm tired, and small bit hungover, but I don't have those feelings, those anxiety, panic attacks, anything like that. So it's been, I'd say, nearly since Ty diagnosed me, I haven't drank shorts since.
Right, okay. Yeah. And to this day, are you still taking the medication? Is it just part of day-to-day life at this point?
Yeah, I'm still taking it. Look, I don't know how long that'll last. If it'll last for the rest of my life, I'm totally comfortable with that. Yeah. If that's what it takes for me to feel, you know, good and not suicidal, you know, I'm happy with that. If I can go off in the near future or down the line, I'm totally happy with that. But like, I'm not going to say that, yeah, I'm 6 months now, that's it, I'm leaving it at that, because that's just not realistic. I'm totally happy if I need to take a tablet to make myself feel better for the rest of my life, and totally comfortable.
It seems like you have a really strong understanding of where you're at and how to get past it and how to deal with it if anything ever does come up again. Yeah,
I am. Like I said, I think there's just coping skills that you develop, I suppose, along the way, and I think that's very important, that once you acknowledge that you have a problem, then you can develop these skills. But if you don't acknowledge it, and if that phone call never comes, or if that cup of tea is never had, you know, to ask the question, you know, you don't develop those coping skills. And like I said, the trigger is always there, that I ask myself, you know, why is this? Why are you not feeling great? And then I could remember then, well, you haven't taken your tablet for 3 days, and that's the reason. And then I get back on it again, and I'm grand, you know. So, but look, I am totally comfortable with where I'm at the moment. I'm comfortable with it all being out there. As I said, if I was going to do it, it was going to be all in, and you know, nothing could be left out. So. I think that's the most important thing, that you can get comfortable with it yourself.
Well, it's great to hear you doing so well, Eoin. I'm sure plenty of people who pick up the book this Christmas will relate with the story or can gain something from the story. I started at the start by calling you James Stephens, centre-back Eoin Larkin. I should also refer to you as under-19 manager Eoin Larkin. Before we wrap up, how are you enjoying that? Because there's a lot of hats in the ring to be the successor to Brian Cody at this point. It seems that every All-Star at this point is putting together a fairly nice CV on the managerial sideline. Yeah,
well, I'd say I'm well down the list now at the moment with an under-19 manager. But look, I'm enjoying doing that. I'm over the under-21s down there this year as well, so right. I'm enjoying that. I love being able to try and help other people and, you know, develop and all that kind of stuff, and if I can help them a small bit, you know, I get great satisfaction out of that. Obviously the winning is everything, but if you can't do that, you can help those lads along, and hopefully, you know, we'll win 1 or 2 games along the way. Maybe not a championship, but who knows.
How do you see the Kilkenny managerial path going over the next couple of years? When Brian Cody steps away, that could be for a long, long time yet. I think you said in the book that perhaps Sheahan could go in as a selector first to learn the ropes a small bit.
Yeah, I could see that happening. Obviously, DJ has gone in at the moment, so I don't know, is he trying to get DJ ready for the job or not? But look, I could see Brian going on for, you know, as long as he's fit and healthy and motivated and hungry for that, which it doesn't seem to be dwindling any bit lately. So look, as you said, there's a lot of lads with good CVs coming there, so it could be anyone, but I wouldn't like to be taking over the job now after Brian Cody. It'd be like maybe, I suppose, David Moyes taking over after Alex Ferguson.
I wouldn't be so harsh on yourself.
It'd be a pies and chalice. But look, yeah, I can't see him giving up anytime soon.
Yeah, neither can I. Listen, the book is called Camouflage. It's out right now. It's by Eoin Larkin, and it's brilliant. Thanks a million, Eoin.
Cheers.